Well, hello, Matt, and hello to everybody watching. Thank you, Matt, for taking time to join me today. I'll let Matt introduce himself, but he is the founder of First Lap, First Life After Prison. Um, and today, or I should say too, First Lap is one of the recipients of the Reimagine Fund, which is the fund that Faith Action is taking this year to invest some funds into organizations like MATS and like Ekolu Meanui that are working to integrate some culturally grounded practices for reentry for folks coming out of prisons. So Matt, just to give people a little bit introduction about you, could you share with us your name, where you call home, and an ancestor that taught you what love is?
Okay, my name is Matthew Taufatee. I'm the executive director of the First Lap. LAP is an acronym for Life After Prison. So we just celebrated 20 years, January of this year, of being in operation, housing men released from prison, help them to get back on their feet. And my passion has always been to help those coming out because I was once incarcerated and I knew the hardship, of coming out, not being able to get a job, don't have any IDs and so forth. And so that's what led me to start the First Lap when I had that vision of helping other people just like me. Over the years, I just um, got wiser and connected with better people, different organizations that have that heart, to really help them rather than keeping them in prison, and there's so many things, we could do to help a lot of our men because right now we have little over 1,000 men incarcerated compared to the women. We have just a couple hundred, under 300, I believe. So it's really the men that have, a lot of challenges coming out. They don't have programs in the prison to help prepare them, when they get released. So that's why the recidivism rate is so high of them going right back in, for whatever violation it is. But this is where First Lap, is a big support for a lot of them. Because we not only house them, but we take them step by step on what they need to do. And that's how, I came up with that name, the First Lap, just like in any other race. The first lap, you need to pace yourself, meaning the men need to just chill, relax, and don't get overwhelmed with all the stipulations that the paroling authority puts on them.
Mm.
I'm sure a lot of you guys probably heard, they have to get a job and these things, and it's highly unlikely that they won't get hired, right away, unless they have good reputations or been out before and worked long with that employer, so most likely they won't get employed, and what a lot of these guys do, they end up stressing out, and then turn to the thing that really comforts a lot of them, which is turning right back to drugs and alcohol, which usually is the reason why they go right back into prison for a violation. Yeah, so helping them get all these stuff is what First Lap does. The first 30 days, we escort them to see their parole officer, get them, their medical through Waikiki Health Center, get their IDs, whatever they need, Social Security, all those things, we help them to get all of that so they feel real comfortable and relaxed. So by the time that 30 days is over, they're ready to go and seek employment, on their own. So, that's why I just love, that this work, helping guys and just seeing them, make it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really beautiful work that you do, Matt. I didn't know it was 20 years this year. Congratulations. Wow.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Matt, I know that faith is a really important part of your life. How has that kind of played a role in how First Lap was formed?
Oh, yes. If it wasn't for my faith, I probably would have been gone, you know, being released on parole and right back home, you know, to where a lot of that trauma, you know, occurred. It just led me right back to the streets of drinking and drugging, you know, and with the gang life, you know. But it wasn't until a group of men came to the streets and they witnessed to me and was telling me about God. You know, I never believed in God. And, but because my cousin was one of those men in that ministry, you know, I decided to, you know, give it a chance after I spoke to my wife. My wife and I were married 3 years. We had 3 children, you know, so just struggling, not being able to get a job, you know, because of my criminal history. And so we went to church, and that totally helped to change my life. You know, just looking at my past, I couldn't let go of my past. You know, it was difficult, you know, for me. And that's what drove me to prison, is because of a lot of the abuse that was going on at home is the same thing, you know, I was doing out on the streets, and not really understanding back then. Uh, you know, there's the saying, hurt people hurts people.
Mm.
And because I was hurting so bad on the inside with the abuse, you know, put on us, you know, through our father, you know, I wanted other people to feel just like me,
Mm.
you know. So I never really realized, you know, all those stuff until, you know, my mind cleared up, you know, I made this transition in my life. So it led me to a life of crime, you know, in and out of jail, you know, and my reputation, you know, in that gang life was that I was a tough guy. But, you know, as I found out, you know, that was just mask I was putting on because, you know, I wanted people to look up to me, you know, fear me, you know, and all those things, and which led me to always getting into fights, you know. So in 87, you know, I picked the attempted murder charge. And by this time, my family moved to Palolo housing. I mean, not the housing, outside of the housing. And so when I got released, I went right back home, as I shared, you know. So being out on supervised release, back to home where a lot of that abuse happened, I went right back to the same thing, drinking, drugging, and joining my gang members. And just a year later, I got into another fight. But this time I ended up killing a man.
Mm.
So here I was back in prison in 1988, the age of 20, facing 2 life sentences. Yeah. And if that wasn't bad enough, you know, 3 months later, the family retaliated and they killed my older brother.
Mm.
Yeah. So, you know, just all that pain and what I was going through at that time, I just didn't want to live anymore, you know. But fortunately, you know, for me, I didn't want to plea bargain, you know, to take the deal they was offering me. I wanted to go to trial. And so when we went to trial, um, they convicted me of the lesser charge, which was manslaughter. Carried 10-year sentence. Out of the 10 years, I served 5.5 and got released in 93. And as I shared, I went right back home doing the same thing on the verge of going right back into prison. Is when a group of men came to the streets, reached out to me, and told me about this God that they serve.
Mm.
Since that time is when it gave me that passion, you know, to do the same thing they were doing to me.
Mm.
And, you know, fortunately, you know, my pastor, he had that calling. He mentioned to me after sharing my video testimony through the whole church, people started to hear, you know, of the testimony of me and my father. The pastor said, Matt, you know, God is telling me to have you go back to your dad's church and help your father's church. Of course, I was reluctant, you know, at first, you know, but being obedient to my pastor, I said, okay. And that's when we went to my father's church in Palolo and just sat down. And that's when a lot of good things started to happen.
Mm.
You know, my wife, you know, She attended the first service with me. She was uncomfortable because she got to witness everything that I shared to her regarding how we grew up in church. You know, the abuse of the kids in church, you know, just seeing them get smacked, you know, and spanked, you know, right in front of everybody else
Mm,
is the church that I grew up in.
mm,
Yeah. So when she seen that, she was uncomfortable. She didn't want to go back. But me staying faithful to my pastor, I continued there. And that's when my father really asked my sister of why is it only now I'm doing, you know, the Lord's work, you know, of hearing that I'm out there on the streets ministering to youth, you know, helping the youth. And so that's why I said, well, let's meet next week. And, you know, I'll tell you, you know, why I'm doing this now. So I had a plan, and that plan was, you know, we're going to sit down and we're going to watch that video testimony I was talking about that my church did, you know, and so we sat down, my parents and my two siblings, you know, right at the table. And my father just gave that question. Why is it only now I'm doing God's work? All these years he prayed for that. Yeah. So I say, well, Dad, I want you to watch this video. And that's when we watched a video of Word of Life, of the story they did for me. You know, it showed of me witnessing to our youth at one of the schools. And through my testimony, as I just shared, you know, with you, is where my father got uncomfortable when he got to the point where I said my father was a pastor, you know, he was a hypocrite. You know, he got uncomfortable to where he stood up and he yelled and said, I told you I loved you. Then I stood up and said, yes, Dad. But it was always when you were beating me up.
mm,
And that's when the first time he sat back down, and me and my sisters, for the first time, we seen our father start to cry. He started to cry and he said, son, you're right. Let me tell you a story. And that's when he told us his story of how he used to be abused by our grandfather. He was a drunkard in their village and he always got into fights.
mm,
So for me, the healing began at that time because I understood that my father was only raising us the way he was raised. He
mm,
never healed, yeah, he never forgave his father. And that's the way, you know, I looked at everything, you know,
mm,
why he's to carry that anger.
mhm,
Yes. So anyway, healing began then. And when the Lord um, told me to start this program, that was my way of assisting his church, you know, through the finances of renting the facility they had. And that's how First Lap came about. Yeah. So just doing all these things, you know, things just started to get better, you know, help a lot of men to turn their lives around, you know, get full-time jobs, you know, and so that ministry I was a part of, um, the pastor started his own church and he called me in 2014 and told me he heard about a youth group that I started. It's called the Peacemakers in honor of my victim and my brother, you know, who were both, you know, violently killed in 1988. And so when he heard about that, he said, Matt, can you come to my church and share? I said, of course, you know, but one of his members was my victim's sister and she wanted to confront me. And so I showed up at the service on that Sunday morning. He introduced both of us, shared a little bit about our background, and that is when um, healing began for her as well, because she shared of her anger and hatred for me after taking her brother's life. And then when she heard my story and of my peacemakers in honor of her brother and, you know, my brother, you know, we both were in tears. We made the amends. And ever since then, she's become a peacemaker, you know. So anytime we get called to go and share at different places, you know, she volunteers and comes and join me so we can share about that power of forgiveness.
mm,
So that right there, you know, I can say is where my life is today. You know, just sharing the love with anyone, I come into contact with. Yeah. And this is pretty much my new life I have today. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. I think it's really beautiful that just as church is really sanctuary and support for so many people, I think that's what Peacemakers and it sounds like First Lap has become too over the past 20 years. I know that you support a lot of different men and a lot of different community members as well. Yeah, through that.
Yes.
Well, Matt, I think you probably know this already, but for anybody who's watching, it takes $219 a day, so almost $80,000 a year, right, to incarcerate one person. And this year, something that we're trying to ask as Faith Action is, instead of investing all of this money into our current prison system, what are the things that we should be investing that money in? So I kind of wanted to get your thoughts about that.
Well, I think right now, as I shared, with the amount that you just shared, we have over 1,000 inmates incarcerated. So if the numbers are correct, we're spending like 800 million annually, yeah, just to keep our men in prison. Not having programs in there, to help them to heal of a lot of these traumatic experiences, that a lot of them had. Yeah, they'll end up going right back in.
Mm.
Yeah. So as far as what the money, that's a lot of money. So rather than invest in them going into prison, why not support programs, or treatment centers that actually making an impact on these men's lives so that they can just turn around, and I can say a lot of the issues is dealing with alcohol and drugs, for a lot of them incarcerated, because I believe the rate of crime committed is usually little over 70% of them are under influence.
Mm.
Yeah. So if we can help them to refrain from drinking or using, they have a better chance, of staying crime free.
Mhm.
And that's one of the things that First Lap does. As whereas a lot of different clean and sober houses, but I can say our place has more structure, to where everyone is watched, everyone is counseled, so we know where all of our men are at. So like right now, we have 13 men, 10 of them are full-time employed. Yeah, the other three were just recently released to us. Yeah, so just step by step, and eventually we know all of them going to be working. Yeah, so that's what our program does, is really helping these men to become more, independent,
Mhm.
reconnect them with their loved ones. And so yes, if we could have those funds going to organizations or treatment centers that really helps, our men and women,
Mhm.
that would be a great.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, personally, Matt, I would love to see funds like that go to organizations like yours, that you're really doing that important work of reconnecting with community and providing that really good support. Yeah, as people come out.
Yeah.
Well, thanks, Matt, for taking time today. Is there anything else you kind of want to share with anybody that might be watching before we end our time?
Well, I think I just, want everybody to know um, that everyone needs, to have that sense of belonging, feel that someone cares about them, and so, be available or open, to help someone else in need. Yeah. And that's the only thing, I have to share.
I love
Yeah.
that. Yeah, I love that. Well, thank you so much, Matt, for taking some time today. I learned a lot from you.
Thank you.